Hey guys, it's Courtney, and I am back with another card using the October 2018 card kit by Simon Says Stamp. I am starting off here with a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock. This is cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I am using my Misty again because I'm stamping this really large image from the stamp set. I'm lining this up on the side of the card panel. However, at this point in the game, I'm not really sure if this is going to be the side or the bottom or the top of my card. I use my anti-static tool and I'm stamping this down with Versamark ink, and I'll be using gold embossing powder by Ranger to heat set this. Now you want to make sure that your heat gun is completely warmed up before you bring it to the paper. Paper will warp, and being we're doing a type of watercoloring here, I want to make sure that it's as flat as possible. It just makes the watercoloring just a little bit easier. I always start from the back of my card panel and then bring it to the front. I don't know if this actually helps, but it's just a habit of mine. It allows the heat gun to heat up a little bit more too. Next, we'll move on to adding the watercolor here. I wanted these flowers to be soft. And I know that most of the real brush pens, whether it be these or the Zigs, they're very vibrant. So I'm just adding a little bit of the pigment down, and then I'm using a damp paintbrush to blend that out. So I'm starting with the leaves here, and I'm just adding a little bit of the pigment where the leaves would be the darkest. So where they would be touching that branch, or closest to the branch, I guess. And then I'm going in with my damp paintbrush, and I'm starting where the pigment is not laid out, so where the white area, and then bringing that paintbrush down to the pigment and letting that blend out a little bit. I know I'm a little off camera, but I'm doing the same thing to these leaves as I did with the others. Now, none of these colors are labeled, so I have a little scrap piece of the Bristol Smooth over on the side, and I'm just testing out my colors to make sure that I'm kind of sticking to the color scheme that I'm looking for. Next, we'll move on to this larger flower right there in the center. Again, I'm just adding color where my darkest areas would be. So where these leaves are kind of gathered up in the center, same as if we were coloring these with the Copics like we did yesterday, adding my darkest color with that pen, and then going in with a damp paintbrush to blend that out. Now, each time I'm cleaning off my paintbrush, I'm also dabbing this off on a paper towel so that it's not overly wet. If you end up adding too much water, it's fine. I kind of just take my paintbrush and push some of that pigment down towards that center where I want that darkest areas to be. If it is too wet, it's just going to spread pretty much evenly throughout the petal. So you can just kind of push that down, or you can dab it up with a paper towel and kind of just start over. Now, for some of these petals here, they're kind of folded over on themselves. So I did add a little bit of a shadow there as well, where it is folded over, and just let that blend out. For the next flower, I wanted this to be kind of like a golden yellow. I'm really not adding much pigment here at all. I'm just adding it to the center of the flower, and then again, taking that wet paintbrush or damp paintbrush and letting that blend out on its own. For these little rounder flowers, squiggly looking flowers, I'm going in with one color, and then I realized, well, first let me do this one. I lied. This one I'm coloring orange, and I'm just adding a little bit of the pigment where the petals meet. And then again, going in with that damp paintbrush to blend that out. Now this one is slightly different than these other squiggly ones that we have two of, but I'm going to color these the same exact way as I did with this one. The color that I chose, because I'm toning it down so much, ended up blending in. It was too similar to that first flower that we colored. So I am, like I said, coloring it the same way. Once I added that water, that's when I realized it was a little bit too similar. So once I had all of the water down and I kind of just let it do its thing and blend out, I will go back in and add a different a different color to it, just to kind of darken it up and make it a little bit different than that first flower that we colored. And because the flower is still damp, I don't take the pen right to the flower. I'll scribble some of that onto an acrylic block and then pick that up with my damp paintbrush and just add in just a little bit where the darkest areas will be. Depending on how wet the flower still is or how damp it is, it may blend on its own, or you may need to add a little bit more water. Mine ended up drying a little bit too fast, and I did have to add a little bit more water just to help blend that out into that first color that we did lay down. Next, we'll move on to these larger buds. I have one there on the top and one on the bottom, and I'm actually going to use kind of like a soft brown color. And the only shading that I'm really doing on this one is where it's laying underneath that other flower, just laying out some of that pigment and the opening of the bud, and then again just blending that out with a damp paintbrush. Wasn't really worried about too much shading here. It is kind of a simple image. Next, we'll move on to these little tiny buds there on the top of the floral arrangement, and I used a green here. It is brighter than what I maybe intended, but I'm just adding a little tiny dot right there in the center, and then taking my damp paintbrush and just dabbing that on. I'm not really doing any kind of special blending here. These are really teeny tiny areas, and even though you have the embossing to kind of save you from going out of the lines, these are really tiny. So if you add too much water, it may still bleed. For these larger buds or berries or whatever they are off to the side, and again, I'm sorry, I'm a little off camera, but I'm just doing the same thing, even though I'm just adding a little bit more pigment because these are larger areas, but just blending that out with that damp paintbrush again. Once my panel was completely colored, I let that air dry. It doesn't take too long, being we're not using all that much water, probably about 5 minutes or so. I couldn't decide which way I wanted this card panel to be. I ended up arranging so that the floral spray is on the top part of my panel. I'm trimming off about 1/4 of an inch, or maybe a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch from the bottom, because we're going to add a little bit of a strip just to add a little bit more interest here, and we'll be using some gold paper for that. I'm going to go back in with my anti-static tool because I'm going to heat emboss my sentiment, and I'm using one of the sentiments from the kit, and I'm also taking an Emboss It pen by Ranger, and I'm just going to add a few little dots scattered around. I wanted to splatter, I guess, some of the pigment, and I just didn't. So I figured this will be the next best thing. I'm doing these a little bit different in size. Sometimes I'm just barely touching the tip. Sometimes I'm spreading it out a little bit. And then again, going back in with that gold embossing powder and heat setting that. Once that was heat set, I took a piece of gold cardstock, and this actually came in one of the Simon Says stamp kits from maybe about 3 or 4 months ago. And I'm cutting this down to 5.5 by about an inch. And I'll just adhere this flat down to an A2 size card base with my Tombow Mono multi glue. I'm going to place this on the bottom part. This is another landscape card, so I'm adhering this just flat down. Next, I'll take a piece of fun foam and I'll be putting this onto my panel that we colored there, and I'll use strong double-sided tape on this. I think this is Be Creative tape or something very similar to it. You can use anything that's strong enough to hold the fun foam. For some reason, fun foam doesn't stick to anything. Once I had that down, I noticed that my gold strip there was just a little bit longer than my card panel itself, so I just took my paper trimmer and just trimmed off a very tiny little bit to make that all even. And that's it for this one, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.